So to take out the transmission of the car, the first thing you want to do is jack it up in the air, and then there's an X-brace that goes across the transmission. Mine is removed because it doesn't fit anymore with the turbo's downpipe. But anyways, that's the drain bolt, that's the fill bolt. You want to crack the fill bolt first, and then the drain bolt, because you don't want to empty out all the fluid, and then you end up with a transmission you can't fill back up. Now we're going to drain the transmission, use a 24mm socket. I had to use a short socket because the deep socket with the ratchet hits the transmission tunnel. I would love to have a 6-point, but mine's a 12-point. Just make sure you keep it on there square so you don't strip out the edges. Crack the top, then crack the bottom, take out the bolt, let it drain out. For the interior, there's going to be one screw underneath the cover if you still have it in the cup holder. Then you remove the back panel and there will be 2 screws. 1, 2, all Phillips. I have an NC2 console inside my NC1. I believe for the NC1s there is a little holder right here in the front of the shifter. You pull that out and there will be 2 Phillips head screws that sit there for a total of 5. But this NC2 just has 3 screws in it. To remove the parking brake boot, you pull up straight from the rear, straight up, and then you slide backwards, and then you can shimmy the leather off of the handle. This is just a better illustration of what you need to do to get it out. Then you remove your shift knob, however it goes on there. Mine just unscrews. And then you can lift the console up, pop the 2 front tabs, and the whole console will come up. Be careful about the window switches. You're going to push down on a tab that faces the passenger side with your fingernail, and it'll come straight out. This gives you a better view of the connector. Little tab right there. Push in with your index finger, and you can yank it right out. So then there are 4 10mm nuts that you gotta take off to remove this shift boot plate. Just be careful when you remove it. Mine was a little bit greasy. You might get some oil on your hands. Keep a shop towel or rag handy nearby and somewhere to put it all, like that green container I have on the floorboards. Then there will be 3 10mm screws to remove, and this takes out the entire shifter with the reverse lockout plate and the shifter bushing. From factory, Mazda has a plastic shifter bushing in there. I replaced mine with the Fab 9 brass bushing because mine got disintegrated. Either way, just flipped it straight up and straight out of there. So there's a front brace, it's black, and it's about 3-ish feet long. 4 bolts to hold it in. Mine is removed because the turbo's downpipe sits the midpipe a little bit too low and it doesn't fit in the car, so mine's not even on the car anymore. I think the factory is 12mm. Mine came off, so I replaced them all with 10mm and some nuts, or some washers. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the rear brace. Just remember to thread the hardware you have back to where they go so that you don't have to keep track of where they are and have a pile of nuts and bolts. So now we're going to do the front of the mid-pipe. Right here is where the cat would usually go. I have an exhaust cut out there, but don't need to worry about that. Right here, 2 14mm nuts on studs of the factory manifold. Mine is a turbo downpipe, so it's just nuts and bolts. Either way, just unscrew them. You might need to hit with a PB blaster or a torch to get some heat on it to get it off for the first time. Mine come right off. I've taken it off so many times. Onto the rear connection of the car. I have the Goodwin Super Q exhaust, so I don't have studs, but the factory car has studs. I believe it's a 14mm nut as well back here. Mine are just nuts and bolts. Same thing, just remove these 2 here. Might need to hit with PB, might need to put a torch on it. Finally is the exhaust hanger right here. It's 2 12mm nuts. You can hang on to the mid-pipe with one hand, undo it with the other hand, and Then push the studs up through the power plant frame and shimmy out the entire mid-pipe. Now we need to take out the 4 bolts that hold the drive shaft to the differential. They're 14 millimeters. If you haven't done it before, just rotate it, yank the handbrake, and then you can use a wrench or socket with a wobble extension on it to break them loose. You might want to have 2 people to do it, make it a lot easier. If not, just get up and get out of the car. I've taken mine off so many times and I have an impact gun. I'm just going to take them right off. One thing you are going to want to do is mark the drive shaft so that you can reinstall it in the same orientation that it was from factory. My 3 marks right there were no good because that stays on the differential. You have to mark on the flange and that front face with the Sharpie. You'll see later how it separates and why my original 3 marks didn't work. Now that those rear bolts are out, you're going to push the drive shaft forward just a little bit and then pull it out. You're going to want to put something underneath the drive shaft because some oil will spill out and you're going to want to catch it. When you remove the drive shaft, set it down somewhere, make sure that entire front section that goes into the transmission doesn't get dinged, scratched, marred, or dirty. So wrap it up in a towel and place it somewhere safe. I wrapped up the back end in a plastic bag and some towel just to keep it from getting everywhere. Before you remove the front power frame bolts, you need to support the transmission because that's the third mount for the engine. There's only 2 in the front and they go from left to right, so the engine can tilt forward or backwards. If you don't support the transmission, it'll rock backwards and put some pressure on some components on the top like the valve cover and such. Moving on to the rear 4 bolts that go to the differential. Once you unbolt it, the differential right where that flange is can tilt downwards. And so to prevent it from putting strain on anything and keep it kind of in the same position that it normally is, you just wedge a piece of wood between the subframe and the back of the differential, and it'll hold it at about that angle and not let it droop and fall down underneath the car. Then you can remove the 424mm bolts at the front, and the transmission will sag a little bit as it sits onto the transmission jack. Here you can see how much the differential will tilt downwards if you don't support it on the back. It doesn't really do any kind of damage, but it just keeps the differential in the orientation that it normally sits. And then remove the 4 24mm bolts in the rear and drop the PPF and take it on out of the car. Replace the nuts right into there so you can keep track of where they go. Then you're going to remove 2 12mm bolts that hold the clutch slave in. Don't worry, no fluid's going to come out, you're not going to lose any pressure in your system, it's completely sealed still at this point. Remove them, move the slave out of the way, and just slightly hand screw the 2 bolts back into the transmission so you can keep track of where they're at. Now you're going to remove the 4 plugs that go to the transmission. 2 are white plugs, 2 are black plugs. There's male and they're females. They're the exact same ones, just match colors. You just push down on the tab on the white ones and they come out, and then push down on the same tab on the black ones. They come out, but the black ones stay on the transmission and the white ones come out of the transmission. So now we get to the bell housing bolts. They're all 14mm and there's 2 nuts. 2 of them you can see at the very bottom of the transmission, 2 of them face to the rear, and then there's 2 of them that face towards the front of the car that I'll get to in the next step. And these are going to be the 5 bolts to remove the underside panel of the car to access the 2 bolts that face the front of the car for the bell housing. Use a 6-inch extension and you can just reach right across to crack these 2 bolts and get them right on out of there. On the passenger side, just above the header of the downpipe, you're going to see 2 14mm nuts. Those 2 are super easy to get to. Take them right off. On the driver's side, there are 2 bolts, 14mm, just as the others. Super easy to get to. Take them also right out. And so now we're going to go up to the final couple of bolts. There's 3 of them up here. They're more difficult to get to, but not impossible. You are going to need some extensions. I use a 20-inch extension, a 9-inch extension, I think 2 6-inch extensions with it, and a wobble socket at the end. You got to get kind of creative, but you can definitely get to all of them. So you can see all 3 of them in this shot right here. Here's a shot of me using every extension known to mankind. I put the gun right past the end of the transmission, and I can take out all the bolts up there. Once you get all 3 of those top ones out, you can just lower the rear end of the transmission and pull it backwards, and lower it, pull it backwards until the transmission is fully free and it comes right on out.